The entire throne hall is laughing at me, and I let them. 600 nobles packed shoulder to shoulder, silk and gold and cruelty, and every single one of them thinks I'm about to embarrass myself to death. The puzzle master's board sits in front of me, 42 moving pieces, a solution that's supposedly impossible in under an hour. I solved a version of this exact puzzle when I was 11 years old, in my father's basement, 3 days before they burned his books and hung his name from the palace gates. None of them know that. The queen is watching me from her throne with her hands locked so tight her knuckles have gone white. If I fail this trial, our marriage gets annulled by noon. If she loses me, she loses her crown by winter. Lord Rain is smiling at me from the front row like a man who already won. He has no idea what I actually am. But if you want to understand how a gravedigger's assistant ended up married to a queen, staring down the most powerful man in the kingdom, you need to go back 40 days. 40 days ago, Queen Elara Ashworth had a problem, and the problem was that I didn't exist in her plans at all yet. Her father died in the spring. Some called it his heart. Nobody who mattered actually believed that. Elara took the crown at 22, with a council full of men who smiled at her coronation and started plotting her replacement before the ink dried on the succession papers. The law of Vermore is simple and vicious. An unwed queen has 1 year to marry, or the throne passes to the nearest male heir. Elara had 11 months left. Every suitable husband the council offered came from a great house. Every one of them would automatically qualify to rule beside her the moment the wedding contract was signed. That's the part they never said out loud. A king consort from an approved house doesn't just get a title. He gets a council seat, a claim on the treasury, and legal grounds to challenge her for the throne within a year. They weren't offering her husbands. They were offering her replacements. I heard about the last attempt secondhand, from a laundress who worked the East Wing and couldn't stop retelling it. The council had brought Elara a broad-shouldered young lord named Garrick, polished and confident, who knelt in front of her throne and told her that marrying him would finally give Vermore the strong hand it deserves. She had him escorted out of the palace within the hour. Strong hand meant his hand closing around her throne within a year, and everyone in that room understood it, including him. Elara didn't need a strong hand. She needed a hand that couldn't hold anything at all. She refused 6 proposals in 4 months. The council started running out of patience. Then someone reminded her of an old law nobody had used in 200 years. A queen could marry a commoner instead, as long as he passed something called the trial of the crown within his first year. Fail it, and he stays a ceremonial husband forever. No seat, no claim, no power. Just a name and a ring. Fail it, and everyone assumes he's an idiot, and idiots don't get ambitious. So the day her steward brought her a list of unmarried men in the capital slums, Elara wasn't looking for someone charming. She was looking for someone guaranteed to fail. She found me. I should probably tell you who I actually am before this gets confusing. My name is Corin Wick. In the capital, they call me Dimwick, a joke I built myself, brick by brick, for 11 straight years. My father was Aldrich Wick, court alchemist, the smartest man I ever met. He solved a formula that threatened to expose half the council's smuggling operations. 3 weeks later, they arrested him for treason he didn't commit, and I watched them execute him from a crowd of strangers who cheered. I was 10 years old. I understood exactly one thing that day. Being the smartest person in the room gets you killed. My father used to say, a real answer never announces itself. It just quietly rearranges everything around it until the problem stops existing. He taught me that on a puzzle board just like the one I'd need 11 years later, tracing pieces across our kitchen table by candlelight, patient in a way most fathers running from creditors never bothered to be. 11 moves. That was his signature. The fewest number of moves anyone in Vermore had ever used to solve that particular class of puzzle. I used to think it was just a number. I didn't know yet it would be the exact detail that got both of us noticed by the same man, 11 years apart. So I stopped being that person. In public, anyway. I learned to slur my words, lose arguments on purpose, forget things I'd memorized perfectly. I took jobs nobody respects. Gravedigger, scribe's errand boy, tavern sweep. Jobs where nobody expects a single clever thought to happen behind your eyes. Underneath all of it, I never stopped working. For 11 years, I've been quietly collecting proof of exactly who framed my father and why. I just needed a way inside the palace walls that didn't get me killed on sight. I ended up filling in his unmarked grave myself, years later, when the plot finally got reassigned and someone had to clear it. Nobody digging beside me knew whose bones they were moving. I did. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since I was 10. I just made sure his marker ended up somewhere I could still find it, and went back to sweeping tavern floors like nothing had happened. Then a royal steward showed up at the tavern where I mop floors and asked if I wanted to marry the queen. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Big mistake, everyone around me assumed. Poor stupid Dimwick, marrying so far above himself he'd embarrass the whole capital. They had no idea I'd been waiting for a door like this to open for 11 years. The audition, if you can call it that, happened in a side chamber with exactly 4 witnesses. Elara sat behind a desk like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. "Can you read?" she asked. "A little," I said, which was a lie roughly the size of the palace itself. "Can you hold a conversation without embarrassing the crown in public?" "I'll try my best, Your Majesty." I let my voice crack on the honorific like I'd never said fancy words before in my life. She looked at her steward and said one sentence that decided the rest of my life. "He'll do." That's the whole audition. She didn't pick me because she liked me. She picked me because I was safe, harmless, and guaranteed to fail the trial of the crown someday, leaving her fully in control forever. She had no idea she'd just recruited the one person in the capital smart enough to actually pass it. Rain found her within the hour, of course. He always found out everything within the hour. "A gravedigger," he said, standing in her council chamber like he already owned it. "You'd humiliate the crown with a gravedigger rather than accept a proper match?" "I'd humiliate the crown with a husband who can't take it from me," Elara said. "That's the whole point, my lord. The trial of the crown exists for a reason. If he passes it, he won't." She said it like a fact, not a hope. "Ask anyone in the capital. They'll tell you exactly what I told you. Dimwick couldn't outthink a turnip." Rain smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Let's hope, for your sake, the turnip stays a turnip." He left without waiting for a response. Elara didn't know it yet, but she'd just made the second biggest gamble of her life, right after taking the crown itself. And she'd made it on a man she'd known for 9 minutes. The wedding happened 6 days later, rushed and public and humiliating on purpose. The council wanted every noble in the capital to see exactly how far the queen had fallen, marrying a slum rat instead of one of their sons. I walked down that aisle playing every part of the fool. I tripped once. I said I do a half-second too early and had to be corrected. The whole hall laughed, and Elara's jaw tightened like she was chewing glass. Lord Rain didn't laugh. He watched me the entire ceremony with the kind of attention you give something you're not sure is actually harmless. I filed that away. Interesting. At the reception, Rain raised his glass and gave a toast so polite it was practically an insult. "To the Queen," he said, "and to her husband. May he bring exactly as much to this marriage as everyone expects." The hall laughed again. I smiled like I didn't understand why. Only one person in that room wasn't laughing or smirking. A Queen's Guard captain named Doran Cade, arms crossed, watching me with the flat, unreadable look of a man paid to notice things other people miss. I made a note of him too. A captain who doesn't laugh at the fool is a captain worth watching. Our first night alone as husband and wife wasn't romantic. It was a negotiation, and she ran it like a general. "Here's how this works," Elara said, not looking up from her paperwork. "You stay out of council business. You sign whatever I put in front of you. You smile at banquets and say nothing important. Ever. In return, you eat well, you sleep warm, and nobody in this palace touches you." "Sounds fair," I said. "It's not a negotiation." "Then it's definitely fair." She almost smiled at that. Almost. I agreed to everything because everything she wanted from me was exactly the access I needed. A husband nobody watches can go anywhere, hear anything, ask any question and get shrugged off as harmless curiosity. She thought she'd caged a fool. She'd handed a hunter the keys to the forest. The first crack in my act happened 3 weeks in, at a minor council dinner I wasn't supposed to matter at. Lord Rain's favorite courtier, a smug young lord named Pelamy, decided it would be entertaining to test the new fool husband in front of everyone. He slid a riddle across the table. A trade route puzzle real merchants used to screen apprentices, nothing a commoner should recognize. "Just for fun," Pelamy said, already smirking at the punchline he expected. I solved it in 4 seconds inside my head. Out loud, it took me almost a full minute of stammering, 2 wrong guesses, and 1 answer close enough to right that Pelamy's smile flickered. "Lucky," he muttered, annoyed instead of amused. Elara wasn't laughing with the rest of the table. She was watching me with narrowed eyes, like she'd just heard a note played slightly out of tune and couldn't identify which one. I'd guessed too much right too fast, even wrapped in fake stammering. That was sloppy. That was the first mistake I'd made in 11 years, and the Queen was the one who caught it. I got sloppy again 2 nights later, in the palace archive, 3 floors below anywhere a fool husband should ever be standing at midnight. I was hunting for shipping manifests, records old enough to show which noble houses had been quietly moving goods through unregistered ports the same month my father died. I found 4 names crossed out of the official ledger and rewritten in a different hand. One of them was Rain's. Boots in the hallway nearly caught me before I could relock the cabinet. Captain Cade, doing rounds no captain should personally be doing at that hour. "Lost, my lord?" he asked, in a tone that made it very clear he already doubted the answer would be yes. "Always," I said, letting my voice go soft and confused. "This palace has too many hallways for a man like me." He didn't believe that either, but he let me pass, which told me Cade was the kind of man who collected suspicions quietly instead of reporting them loudly. Another person now watching me. Wonderful. 2 weeks later, someone tried to kill her, and I stopped being careful. It happened at the Autumn Accord banquet. 300 guests, wine flowing, the usual performance of pretending Vermore's nobility actually likes each other. I stood near the Queen's chair, doing my job, smiling, saying nothing, being furniture. Then the wine steward reached for Elara's cup, and something about his hands was wrong. Too steady, too practiced. A real steward doesn't grip a cup like he's about to use it as a weapon. I moved before I decided to move. I caught his wrist a half second before the blade hidden in his sleeve reached her throat, twisted it at an angle that dropped him to his knees, and put my boot on the knife before anyone else in the room even registered a threat. The whole banquet went silent. I looked down at what I'd just done and realized every single person in that hall was staring at me like they'd never actually seen me before. Fool husbands don't disarm trained assassins in under 2 seconds. "Lucky reflexes," I said, forcing my voice back into the same stammering register I always used. I panicked, that's all. I didn't even think." Guards dragged the fake steward away. The banquet resumed, awkward and buzzing with whispers. Rain watched the whole thing from his seat without blinking once, his smile gone completely. That was bad. That was very, very bad. By breakfast, half the palace already had a different story about what happened at the banquet. Some said I'd trained secretly with the city watch. Others insisted the steward had simply tripped and I'd gotten lucky twice in 1 week. Nobody quite believed the second version, but plenty repeated it anyway, because the alternative meant admitting Dimwick might not be dim at all. I let every version spread. Confusion made better cover than any single explanation ever could. Elara pulled me into a side hallway the second we could slip away, and I already knew exactly what question was coming. "Panic doesn't look like that," she said. Quiet, furious, focused entirely on my face like she could read the truth off my skin. "Panic is clumsy. What you did was clean, precise. You disabled him like you trained for it." "I got lucky," I said again, and even I could hear how thin it sounded now. "Nobody gets that lucky twice in 1 month." She meant the riddle. Of course she remembered the riddle. I had 2 choices standing in that hallway. Keep lying badly and confirm every suspicion she already had, or give her a small piece of truth to bury the rest. "My father taught me things before he died," I said, which was true, technically, and revealed almost nothing. "Sometimes it comes out at the wrong time. I try to keep it buried. I'm sorry." She studied me for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of a question she wasn't ready to say out loud. "Bury it better," she finally said, and walked away. She didn't believe the panic story, not for a second, but she also didn't report it to the council, which told me something important. The Queen was keeping my secret before she even knew what the secret was. Not every night in that palace was danger and lies. Some were quieter, and somehow those were worse for keeping my guard up. Elara found me once on a balcony, overlooking the capital, unable to sleep. And instead of ordering me back inside, she just stood there beside me for a while, saying nothing. "Do you ever miss being nobody?" she finally asked. "Before all this?" "Every day," I said, which was the truest thing I'd told her since the wedding. Nobody's safer than somebody. "I used to think that too." She looked out at the city instead of at me. "Then I became queen, and safety stopped being an option either way." We stood there a long time after that, close enough that it would have been easy, too easy, to close the distance between us. I didn't. She didn't either, but I noticed the exact moment she thought about it, and I was fairly sure she noticed the exact moment I did too. I spent the 2 days after that chasing the dead end the fake steward left behind. His body had already been quietly disposed of by the time I asked about it, but his boots hadn't. Cheap, mismatched, stitched with a maker's mark used by exactly one leather worker in the capital, a man who took payment almost exclusively from Rain's household staff. Not proof, not yet, just a thread, thin enough to snap if I pulled too hard. Elara, meanwhile, was fighting her own quiet war. She spent those same 2 days visiting 3 noble houses that hadn't fully committed to Rain's faction, reminding each of them, carefully, exactly how much they owed her father. She didn't tell me she was doing it. I found out from a steward who assumed I already knew everything my wife did, which was, uncomfortably, becoming true. Rain, unfortunately, was thinking the exact opposite thing I needed him to think. 3 days after the banquet, he stood in front of the full council and made a motion nobody expected. Force the Queen's new husband into an early trial of the crown, months ahead of schedule, on the grounds that a man capable of disarming a trained killer was clearly not the harmless simpleton he'd been presented as. "If he's truly gifted," Rain said, voice dripping with false concern, "let him prove it publicly, under the law, like any other man who claims a place beside the throne. And if he's not—" A pause, a smile aimed directly at Elara. "Then Her Majesty will need a real husband before winter." Lord Ferrus Aldane was the only voice raised against the motion, and only briefly. "The law already grants him a lawful trial in due time," he said. "Moving the date early smells less like caution and more like fear." Rain didn't bother arguing. He just smiled at Aldane the way a man smiles at someone he's already decided doesn't matter, and called for the vote anyway. The council voted. 9 houses sided with Rain, 4 sided against him, Aldane's among them. The first real crack I'd seen in a council that had looked unified for months. I noticed Elara noticing it too. The motion passed. I had 11 days to prepare for a trial designed by the same man who wanted my marriage destroyed, and Elara had 11 days to figure out whether the stranger she married was about to save her crown or burn it down with her still inside it. "If you fail this," she told me that night, not bothering to soften it, "I lose everything. The throne, the council, all of it, gone by winter." "And if I don't fail it?" I asked. "What happens then?" She didn't have an answer for that. Neither, honestly, did I, because passing meant showing the entire kingdom exactly how smart I really was, and smart was the thing that got my father killed. The 11 days went fast, too fast. I spent them the way I'd spent every quiet night for a decade, memorizing court records nobody thought a fool could read, mapping every ally Rain had on the council, learning exactly how the trial of the crown had broken every single man who'd attempted it in 200 years. Elara spent them watching me from doorways, pretending she wasn't. On the 7th night, Vex Corrigan found me alone in the East Garden, which I was fairly sure wasn't an accident. "I've broken 41 men on that board," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Every one of them thought they were the exception." "Good thing I'm not trying to be an exception," I said, "just trying to survive Tuesday." He studied me a long moment, the way a man studies a lock he can't quite pick. "Lord Rain asked me to add a second board halfway through, if the first one looks like it might actually be solved. Something harder, something no one's ever passed." That was useful information, and Corrigan clearly knew it. I never figured out why he told me. Maybe an old man tired of watching Rain rig every game in the kingdom. Or maybe he just wanted to see, once, what would happen if somebody actually won fairly. Either way, now I knew to prepare for 2 boards, not 1. Elara wasn't spending those 11 days quietly either. While I buried myself in strategy texts, she spent hers doing something far more dangerous. Walking straight into Aldane's manor and daring the one lord who'd already shown a crack in the council to choose a side for good. "If my husband fails," she reportedly told him, according to the maid who couldn't stop talking about it afterward, "you'll have Rain's council candidate ruling beside me within the season, and every promise my father made your house will be worth exactly nothing." Aldane didn't commit to anything, but he didn't turn her away either, which in Vermore politics was practically an engagement ring. She never told me about that visit. I found out the same way I found out everything in that palace, by listening in places nobody expected a fool to be listening. On the 10th night, she found me awake in the library long after the palace had gone dark, surrounded by books a gravedigger's assistant had no business reading, let alone understanding. She didn't say anything about the books. "Whatever you are," she said quietly, "tomorrow, be enough of it to survive." Which brings us back to the throne hall. 600 nobles, a puzzle I solved when I was 11 years old, and a queen with her hands locked so tight her knuckles had gone white. The council's puzzle master, an old strategist named Vex Corrigan, laid out the board himself. 42 pieces, a configuration that had broken every applicant in 200 years of recorded attempts. "You have 1 hour," Corrigan said, not bothering to hide his boredom. "Most men don't last 10 minutes. I stared at the board and let my face do exactly what everyone expected. Confusion, panic, the slow dawning horror of a simple man in over his head. I moved a piece wrong on purpose. The hall snickered. Rain leaned back in his chair, already savoring it. 20 minutes in, I moved another piece wrong, closer this time. Close enough that a few nobles stopped snickering and started paying real attention. I could feel Elara's eyes on me from the throne, silently begging me to either hurry up or give up so this could just be over. Then I stopped pretending. I reset the entire board in 11 moves, fast enough that half the hall didn't process what happened until it was done, and slid the final piece into place with 43 minutes still left on the clock. Pellamy, sitting 2 rows behind Rain, apparently couldn't stand the silence. "It's rigged!" he shouted, half out of his seat. He must have seen the board beforehand. There's no other way. The board was assembled behind locked doors an hour ago. Corrigan said flatly, not even looking up. By me. Sit down, my lord, before you embarrass yourself further than he just embarrassed you. Pellamy sat down. Nobody laughed at him kindly. Corrigan stared at the finished board like it had personally betrayed him, and before he could say a word, Rain rose from his seat. The board was solved too quickly, Rain announced, voice smooth and reasonable in the way that always meant trouble. Perhaps too quickly to prove real skill. I moved that the trial continue to a second configuration, per the puzzle master's own contingency. A murmur ran through the hall. Elara's hands went white-knuckled again. Corrigan hesitated exactly 1 second too long before nodding and producing a second board from beneath the table. Smaller, denser, uglier, the kind of puzzle built specifically to break a man who'd just proven himself. I'd already known this was coming. Corrigan's warning in the garden meant I'd spent 3 full nights quietly running exactly this shape of problem in my head, over and over, until it stopped feeling difficult at all. I solved the second board in 6 minutes. The hall didn't laugh this time. Nobody made a single sound for almost 5 full seconds. That's, Corrigan started, then stopped, then checked both boards twice like he expected to find a trick somewhere. Neither configuration has ever been solved in under 2 hours, by anyone. Ever. Let alone both, back to back. Guess I got lucky, I said quietly, and this time nobody in that hall believed the lie for even a second. Elara stood up from her throne without meaning to, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was checking whether her heart was still working. Rain's smile had turned into something closer to a wound. The council had no choice but to declare the trial passed. My marriage stood. Elara's crown stood, at least for tonight. Nobles who'd laughed at Dimwick for weeks were suddenly whispering a very different name behind their fans, and I could already tell the Fool Act had roughly 1 foot in the grave. Elara found me afterward in an empty corridor, still pale, still shaking slightly. "Who are you?" she said, not a question anymore, a demand. "Someone who just saved your crown," I said. "Ask me the rest tomorrow." She let me walk away, which told me she wasn't ready for the whole truth yet either. Fine, neither was I. Rain was waiting for me at the end of that corridor, alone, no guards, no witnesses, his smile back, but sharper now. 11 moves, he said, clean, efficient, almost elegant. Do you know the last man I saw solve a board that fast? I said nothing. I didn't need to guess where this was going. Aldrich Wick, Rain said softly, watching my face for the exact reaction he wanted. Your father, I assume, given the resemblance nobody bothered to check for? He used the same technique, same style, same 11 moves, more or less, the week before I signed the order for his execution. The corridor went very cold, very fast. You knew my father? I said, and my voice came out flatter than I intended. I killed your father, Rain corrected, almost gently, like he was doing me a favor by being precise. And now his son is standing in my palace, married to my queen, smart enough to be dangerous. That's a mistake I don't plan on making twice. He walked away before I could answer, and I stood alone in that corridor with 11 years of careful, quiet, patient hiding falling apart in real time. I don't know how long I stood there before Elara came back looking for me, drawn by guards whispering that her husband hadn't moved from that corridor in several minutes. What did he say to you? She asked, and this time it wasn't a demand. It was something closer to fear. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The queen who'd married a fool to save her throne and ended up with something far more dangerous standing beside her instead. And for the first time since my father died, I almost told someone everything. Later, I said instead. Tonight. Just know he's not finished with either of us. She didn't push. She just took my hand in front of 2 guards who would absolutely repeat it to the entire palace by morning and didn't let go. Rain knew exactly who I was, and for the first time since I was 10 years old, watching them hang my father's name from the palace gates, I wasn't the only one in this palace who understood exactly how dangerous I could be. The game had just changed, and he'd just told me himself he intended to end it the same way he ended my father's. The corridor didn't feel real for a long moment. Just her hand in mine, warm and steady, and two guards down the hall pretending not to watch two people who'd clearly just survived something. I made myself breathe. Rain's voice was still sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. "I killed your father." Said so casually, like a man commenting on the weather, like 11 years of my life had been a minor inconvenience he'd solved with a signature and a rope. He knew. Not suspected, knew. Elara didn't let go of my hand the entire walk back to our rooms, and I let her keep holding it, because it gave me something to focus on besides the sound of my own pulse in my ears. When the door shut behind us and the guard's footsteps faded down the hall, she finally turned to face me, and there was no queen left in her expression at all. Just a woman who'd nearly watched her husband unravel in a corridor. "Tell me what he said," she said again, quieter this time, not a demand, almost a plea. I wanted to tell her everything. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been so easy. The words were right there. 11 years of grief lined up behind my teeth, ready to spill out the second I opened my mouth. She'd have believed me. Maybe she'd have even understood. But telling her meant telling her what I actually was, what I'd actually been doing under her roof for weeks, and I still didn't know if she'd protect that secret or report it. Trust isn't something you build in one terrifying corridor. It's something you build slowly, carefully, the same way you build a lie that has to survive 11 years. "He knows about my father," I said instead. "True, incomplete, safe. That's all I can say tonight." She studied my face for a long moment, and I watched her decide not to push, the same way she'd decided not to push after the banquet. That was becoming a pattern between us. She kept finding the edges of my secret and choosing every time to step back from them instead of tearing through. I didn't know yet whether that was mercy or patience. Maybe it was both. "Get some sleep," she said finally, releasing my hand. "Whatever this becomes, it starts again tomorrow either way." She was right, in a way that kept me awake for hours after she'd gone still and quiet in the dark beside me. Rain wasn't a suspicious lord watching from the shadows anymore. He was a man who'd just told me to my face that he intended to finish what he'd started 11 years ago. That changes the math on everything. I'd spent 11 years being careful. Careful gets you killed slowly, one clue at a time, if the man hunting you already knows your name. I needed to be fast now instead. I didn't sleep so much as lie there rebuilding an entire strategy from the ground up, and by the time the sun came through the curtains, I already knew exactly what I had to do first. I had to become somebody again, just not the somebody sitting in that room. There's a version of me that existed before Corin ever married a queen, before Dimwick ever tripped down an aisle on purpose. In the slums, information moves the same way water moves, downhill, into cracks, toward whoever's thirsty enough to pay for it. For years, before the palace, before any of this, I'd been one small trickle of that water. Not a name, not a face, just a mark left in the right place, a folded scrap of paper under the right stone, and a reputation among the people who mattered for being quiet, quick, and never wrong. They called that mark the quiet hand back then. I hadn't used it in over a year. It felt strange, dragging that old identity back out like a coat I'd folded away and told myself I'd never need again. But a coat still fits, even after you've stopped wearing it, and I needed exactly what it offered. A way to move information without moving myself. A palace husband can't be seen digging through shipping manifests every week without eventually being seen. A ghost can. The trouble was getting anything out of the palace at all without 100 eyes on me, now that half the court thought I might not be harmless. I solved it the same way my father used to solve everything, by finding the one place nobody thinks to look, because it's already too sad to look at twice. The pauper's cemetery sits on the low ground past the east wall. the kind of place nobles pretend doesn't exist and guards patrol exactly once a week out of obligation instead of interest. I'd marked my father's grave there myself, years ago, in a way only I would recognize. A specific stone, angled just slightly wrong among 100 identical ones, easy to walk past and impossible to mistake once you knew what you were looking for. Nobody watches a gravedigger's assistant visit a pauper's grave. Even married to a queen, some habits don't raise eyebrows. Grief is the one disguise nobody questions. So on the third night after the corridor, I told the household staff I needed air, walked the east wall alone in the dark like a man visiting his father's memory, and left a folded scrap of paper wedged behind that one crooked stone. It found its way, the next morning, into the hands of the only person left alive who still remembered the quiet hand by name. His name is Fen. He ran messages for half the slum district back when I was still sweeping tavern floors for coin. The kind of man who could disappear into a crowd of two people, sharp-eyed, permanently unimpressed, loyal to money first and people a distant second, except, it turned out, when it came to me. He'd known my father, slightly, in the years before the arrest. That bought me more trust from Fen than gold ever could have. He didn't know I'd married the queen. As far as Fen was concerned, the quiet hand had simply gone quiet for a year and come back with new questions. I intended to keep it that way as long as I possibly could. The fewer people who could connect Dimwick to the quiet hand, the longer both of us stayed alive. My note asked for one thing: anything Fen's old contacts remembered about unregistered shipping through the southern ports 11 years back, the same month my father died. It was the same thread I'd already found once in the archive, the crossed-out names rewritten in a different hand. One of them Rains. I needed more than a thread now. I needed a rope strong enough to hang a lord with. 3 days later, a folded reply waited behind the same crooked stone, written in the same careful, deliberately unremarkable hand Fen always used. It didn't hand me a rope, it handed me another thread, a name, a warehouse, a date that lined up almost exactly with the week my father's formula disappeared from the record. Almost isn't proof, but almost is a start, and starts were the only thing I had 11 years ago too. I nearly missed the second half of the note the first time I read it. Fen had added a line at the bottom, in smaller writing, the kind reserved for warnings instead of answers. Someone's been asking around about the quiet hand again. First time in a year. Careful who you trust right now. I stood there in the dark a long moment, the paper going still in my hand. Somebody was hunting the ghost, not just the man. That meant either Fen had gotten sloppy, which I doubted, or somebody smart enough to notice the pattern had started looking in exactly the right direction. There was only one man in the capital both smart enough and motivated enough to make that connection. Wonderful. I burned the note that night in the fireplace of a room a fool husband had no business having a fire lit in that late, and told myself I'd just have to be faster and quieter than whoever was looking. 11 years of practice had to be worth something. I didn't get much time to sit with that particular fear, because the next morning, Elara handed me a stack of ledgers and changed the shape of my entire week. "The steward's overwhelmed," she said, setting the papers down in front of me at breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tax reconciliation from 3 southern districts. I need someone to check the totals before they go to council." I looked at the stack, then at her, then back at the stack. "You want me to do sums." "I want you to do something useful with your mornings," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You clearly have a mind for numbers when it suits you. Might as well put it to use somewhere that doesn't end with a knife on the floor." It wasn't really about the ledgers. We both knew that. This was a test, small and deniable and easy to walk back if I failed it the way she still half expected me to. Give the clever husband a task simple enough for a child and complicated enough for a fool, and watch exactly how much of the trial in the throne hall had been a fluke. I could feel the trap the moment I opened the first ledger. Real numbers, real districts, and somewhere in the third page, a column that didn't add up the way it should. deliberately, I was almost certain, planted there to see if I noticed or simply signed off on whatever was put in front of me. I sat with that ledger for a long time, weighing exactly how much rope to give myself. Solve it too fast, too cleanly, and I'd be handing her the same proof Rain already had, except this time from someone with far more reason to actually use it against me. Miss it entirely, and I'd be lying so badly it would be its own kind of confession. I found a middle path, the same way I'd found one on the second puzzle board. I took my time. I frowned at the numbers like they genuinely troubled me, muttered half-formed guesses out loud, crossed out 2 wrong answers before landing, apparently by accident, on the actual discrepancy. "There," I said, tapping the page like I'd stumbled into something rather than hunted it down. "This column here doesn't match the total from the district report. Might just be my mistake, though. Numbers get away from me sometimes." Elara leaned over the ledger, and for a moment, I watched her calculating something far more complicated than tax totals. "That's not a mistake," she said quietly. "That's an actual discrepancy. 3 years running, quietly skimmed off the Southern collection. Small enough nobody ever flagged it." "Lucky guess," I said. "You keep saying that." She closed the ledger slowly, watching my face the way she had in that corridor after the banquet. "You know what's strange? I gave you those totals specifically because I already knew that error was there." "I've known about it for 2 months. I wanted to see how long it would take you to find it." There it was, the test, finally spoken out loud instead of quietly conducted. "And?" I asked, because there wasn't any version of that conversation where pretending I hadn't noticed the trap would help me now. "And it took you 4 minutes, she said. "My treasury clerks took 3 weeks. I didn't have a clever answer for that one. For once, I just let the silence sit there, because anything I said next would either be another lie she didn't believe or a truth I wasn't ready to hand her yet. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself," she said finally, gathering the ledgers back into a stack. "Not today, but I need you to know that I notice things too, Corin. I always have." That's how I survived 9 months on this throne with a council full of men waiting for me to fail. It was the first time she'd used my actual name instead of my husband or nothing at all since the wedding, and something about hearing it in her voice landed harder than I expected it to. "Same tasks tomorrow?" I asked, mostly to have something to say. "Different ones," she said, already walking toward the door. "Let's see how fast 4 minutes gets." I sat there after she left, turning that whole exchange over in my head like one more puzzle board. She wasn't reporting me, she wasn't threatening me, she was doing something far more dangerous to my carefully built disguise. She was quietly, deliberately giving me more rope every single day, watching exactly how I chose to use it. I didn't know yet whether that made her an ally or the most patient trap I'd ever walked into. Possibly both. My father used to say, the most dangerous people are the ones smart enough to let you think you're still hiding something from them. I should have spent more time worrying about that, honestly, instead of worrying almost exclusively about Rain. That turned out to be a mistake, though not the kind I expected. 2 days after the ledgers, I noticed the first tail. It wasn't obvious. Whoever Rain had put on me was good. Good enough that I only caught him because 11 years of hiding teaches you to notice the same face appearing in the wrong places twice in one afternoon. A groundskeeper who didn't tend any actual ground, watching the east wall a little too carefully the same evening I usually walked toward the cemetery. I didn't go near the crooked stone that night. I walked the opposite direction instead, toward the training yards, moving like a bored husband looking for something to occupy an idle evening, and doubled back 3 separate times before I was certain the tail had lost interest and gone home to report an uneventful evening. Rain wasn't just watching me from council benches anymore. He'd put resources into it. Real resources. The kind that cost coin and loyalty. The kind you only spend on a threat you take seriously. I sent Fen a warning the following night through a different, older dead drop we hadn't used in years. just in case the cemetery one had been compromised too. Someone's actively hunting now. Burn anything that connects us. I'll find another way to reach you. I didn't get a reply that time, which worried me more than any answer would have. The tension in the palace kept climbing in smaller, quieter ways too. Servants who used to gossip openly around me went careful and clipped whenever I entered a room, like the story of the throne hall had finally caught up to every corner of the building. Guards who once ignored me entirely now tracked my movement down hallways with the same flat professional attention Captain Cade had given me since the wedding. Even Pellamy, who used to sneer at me openly, had gone quiet and watchful instead. The kind of quiet that usually means someone's been told to stop underestimating you out loud and start doing it silently instead. Rain himself, oddly, said nothing to me directly for almost a week. No corridor confrontations, no smiling threats over dinner, just silence, heavy and deliberate, the kind a hunter goes quiet with right before he decides exactly how he's going to close the distance on something he's already caught the scent of. I should have known silence from a man like that was never actually silence. It was preparation. The invitation arrived 6 days after the ledgers, carried by a steward in Rain's household colors, sealed with wax pressed into the shape of his family crest. A private dinner, the note said, small and informal, an attempt at reconciliation after what it called an unfortunate misunderstanding in the corridor. Just the three of us, myself, Elara, and Lord Rain, no counsel, no witnesses beyond the serving staff. I read that note 4 times before I fully believed what it was actually offering me. "You can't possibly be considering this," I said, sliding it across the table to Elara that evening. "Refusing looks weak," she said, reading it with the same flat calculation she brought to everything involving Rain. "Accepting looks like strength. If he wants to pretend at peace in front of his own household staff, let him. It puts him in a position where he has to actually maintain the pretense. Or it puts us in a room with a man who just told me he intends to finish what he started 11 years ago," I said. She looked up at that, something sharpening in her expression. "Then we go in expecting exactly that, and we don't give him an opening." I wanted to argue harder, I genuinely did. But she had a point buried under the danger. Refusing would tell Rain we were afraid of him, and fear was a weakness he'd already shown he knew exactly how to exploit. Going in with our eyes open, at least, meant going in prepared instead of blind. I spent the 2 days before that dinner running every version of the evening through my head that I could imagine, the same way I used to run puzzle configurations before a trial. Poison was the obvious move, if he intended violence at all, subtle, deniable, easy to dress up as an unfortunate accident at a private, witness-light dinner. I cataloged every method I knew of, every antidote, every symptom, everything my father had ever quietly taught me about the alchemy of killing someone slowly enough that nobody could prove it was murder. I didn't tell Elara any of that. Some knowledge is heavier to share than others, and I wasn't ready to explain exactly how a gravedigger's assistant came to know that much about poison. The dinner itself started exactly as smoothly and falsely pleasant as I'd expected. Rain's private dining hall was smaller than I'd imagined. Warm light, good wine, a long table set for exactly 3 with a 4th chair pointedly empty at the head. A silent reminder that this was still, technically, his house to command. "I owe you both an apology," Rain said, once the first course had been cleared, his voice smooth and reasonable in a way that made every instinct in my body sharpen at once. The corridor, the accusations. Perhaps I let old suspicions run further than they should have. Peace serves this kingdom better than suspicion, don't you agree? Peace usually does, Elara said, giving nothing away. I said nothing at all, which he seemed to expect, watching me with the same patient, assessing look he'd given me since the wedding. The wine kept flowing all through the meal, poured by servants who moved with practiced, careful precision, and I found myself watching every hand near every cup like my life depended on it, because it very possibly did. I caught nothing obvious, no hesitation, no unusual grip, No wrong angle the way I'd caught the fake steward at the banquet weeks earlier. Whoever Rain had chosen for this, if he'd chosen anyone at all, was better trained than that. That should have worried me more than it did. I let the conversation's easy rhythm lull me half a step. Just half a step. Exactly long enough for something to go wrong. The final course arrived with fresh cups, a rich, dark wine Rain insisted on pouring himself. A gesture of goodwill, he called it, filling Elara's cup first, then mine, his hands moving with an easy, unhurried confidence that gave away absolutely nothing. I lifted the cup. I actually lifted it, half a breath from drinking, distracted by something Rain was saying about southern trade routes, some deliberately dull, deliberately distracting piece of conversation designed to occupy exactly the part of my attention that should have stayed locked on the cup in my hand. Elara moved before I understood why. Her hand closed around my wrist so fast the cup nearly spilled, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim, and in the same motion she pulled it from my fingers entirely, setting it down hard enough that the sound cracked through the room like a slap. "Something wrong, Your Majesty?" Rain asked, and there it was, finally, just beneath the calm, a flicker of something sharp and furious at having been caught a half-second too early. "The color's off," Elara said, staring at the cup instead of at him, her voice dangerously level. "That vintage doesn't sit that dark, not unless something's been added to it." Rain's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The particular stillness of a man recalculating in real time. "An unfortunate batch, perhaps?" he said. "I'll have the steward see to it." "You'll have the steward drink it first," Elara said, and the room went absolutely silent. Right now, in front of us. I watched Rain's jaw tighten, just slightly, just enough. The steward standing near the wall went pale in a way that told me everything I needed to know before anyone confirmed a single word of it. "That won't be necessary," Rain said finally, too smooth, too fast. "I'll have the whole batch discarded. My apologies for the oversight." Nobody at that table believed the word oversight for even a heartbeat, least of all him. We left shortly after, the pleasantries as thin and false on the way out as they'd been coming in, and I didn't say a single word until we were alone in the corridor outside his household wing, guards trailing a careful, respectful distance behind us. "You knew," I said quietly. "Before you even touched that cup, you already knew." Elara didn't answer right away. She kept walking, jaw tight, eyes fixed straight ahead, and for a moment I thought she might simply keep pretending this had been instinct, or luck, or nothing at all. "I've been watching him for weeks," she said finally, low enough that only I could hear it. "Ever since the corridor. I knew he wouldn't just let the trial go quietly, and I knew you wouldn't tell me exactly how much danger you were actually in. So I started watching for it myself." "Why?" I said. Just that. One word, because I genuinely needed to hear the answer. She stopped walking, turned to face me fully for the first time since we'd left that dining hall, and for once there was no careful queen's mask left on her face at all. "Because somewhere in the last month," she said, "I stopped thinking of you as a problem I inherited and started thinking of you as someone I genuinely regret losing. I don't know what that makes us yet, but I wasn't about to sit at that table and watch him take you from me over a cup of wine." I didn't have an answer for that. Not a clever one, not a careful one, nothing at all. Because for the first time since my father died, someone had just told me, out loud, that they were choosing to protect me. Not the crown, not the marriage, not the useful fool. Me. Rain had wanted this dinner to end with a poisoned cup and a quiet, deniable tragedy. Instead, it ended with the Queen of Vermore admitting, in a dark corridor with guards close enough to hear every word, that she was guarding me on purpose now, which meant Rain hadn't just failed to remove a threat tonight, he'd just confirmed to both of us in the clearest possible terms that he intended to try again.